So the second act obviously was about this evolution of software-defined data centers. In our vernacular, at least inside the company, we call them self-driving data centers, and that's our ambition, at least, to get to a true cloud experience inside. And then, last but not least, as we innovate with our ambition to get into the multi-cloud era, and in this decade of multi-cloud services, we will probably take that long to get there. We have a variety of services, and you'll hear a chunk of them later today, as well as in the keynote tomorrow, between Leap, IoT, as well as Enera, and so forth. But one particular thing I wanted to highlight today was the fact that beyond the multi-cloud services that we're offering over the top, something foundational needs to happen to solve for the multi-cloud era. And what we mean by that is something similar to what we did with hyperconvergence on infrastructure has to be applied to the world of hybrid, right? And it can't just be a control plane problem. It has to be a combination of control plane and data plane. And the word that we use to describe that underpinning technology that needs to get done is app mobility. And to talk about this app mobility construct that we are now releasing in the wild now with this all-new technology called Move, it's my pleasure to invite Laura on stage. Coming up, Laura. Thank you. So many of you might know Laura from, she's one of our earliest engineers. She actually took a sabbatical. One of these days, some of us will all do that. But she took a sabbatical. She created a site called Wine and Passports. And go check it out. And she toured the world. We won't pester her with all the obvious questions of what was the worst country that you visited and all that, outside of India, of course. But
they were all great.
OK. So we were talking about app mobility. Tell us a little bit about the problem.
Cool. So yeah, so typically when we're talking about hybrid environments, we're talking about applications that are living both on-prem and in the cloud. And typically the challenge has always been, once I have that data in the cloud and those applications in the cloud, which in and of itself it's hard, it's even harder to actually get that data back out if we need to. So what we're going to show today is how we're able to simplify that with Nutanix Move integrated into Calm itself.
Got it.
So if I drill down into my system here, I see I have a couple applications running. And in the interest of time, we've kicked off a migration on one of my service applications here. And we can see it's actually running in AWS Cloud with the IP address, the public IP, and the AMI instance information. And if we actually jump into the application itself, we can see that it's basically our fantasy basketball app. And we need to make some picks. We're in the middle of the playoffs. And we'll need to make some picks to see who's going to be in the finals. So I'm gonna pick the Warriors, being from the Bay Area. And Sunil, who do you want to pick?
I mean, I don't know. I don't play or follow basketball. I guess we'll pick the military.
Military, OK. Milwaukee, yeah.
Oh, Milwaukee. Yeah.
Interesting choice.
Same
awesome.
Thing.
Cool.
Same thing. Same thing. All right, good. Yeah.
Cool. So these picks will persist on the AWS app. And if I just jump into my running migration here and do a quick cutover. All right, so we've done the cutover. So to take a couple steps back and talk about kind of what I just did there, to look at another app we have as an example, it's a similar app running in AWS. This one actually has 3 services. Again, we can see the AWS cloud and the IP and the AMI instance information. So we can easily deploy applications into AWS with Calm, but again, the difficulty has always been how do we get them back out? So what we've done is we've integrated a migrate button directly into Calm here. So once you click it, we're leveraging Nutanix Move on the back end from Calm, and we're specifying our source application running in the cloud, and then our destination profile is AHV. And then we specify that cutover time, and that's when we actually want that target application to be live on our target environment. And so that's what we've just initiated on that other app that I showed. If we click next here, we can see the kind of visual representation of our app. The left-hand side shows it running on AWS, and then the corresponding services that would look like running on AHV. And we can also see a cost comparison here. So we can see that migrating this particular app on-prem actually saves us money due to the workload profile.
OK. So that's obviously Move integrated with Calm. before we do any cutovers in general, obviously people would like to actually assess the cost.
Right, right, of course, of course. So people aren't going to just be migrating without a plan. You know, they're not backpacking through Central America with no plan like I was for a while. So with applications, we actually want to make a plan. So users typically you guys want to assess your environment and kind of see what your data is doing so you can make decisions based on that data. So that's where Beam comes into play. So Beam allows us that visibility into our environments across both cloud and on-prem, as we can see here. So we can see our cloud spend across AWS, Azure, as well as Nutanix on-prem. We can see our spend over time. And more importantly, we also get a workload analysis. So Beam's actually making recommendations for us where it's telling us we have 10 workloads, and 5 of those actually would need to be migrated off to get some cost savings. 3 of them could be optimized, basically stay where they are, but there's some optimizations we can do. And then 2 we can just leave as is. So if I drill down further into this, we get a kind of an overview of all of our workloads. And for example, our Archaeus app that we saw previously is here, and then as well as some other apps we have registered. So for example, if I look at one of these apps that's asking, recommending we optimize it, we can see it's running on AWS, and Beam is recommending we keep it on AWS, but there's actually some optimizations that we can do. And since we can see that workload pattern as well is very dynamic, so that makes it a great use case for the public cloud. But again, if we click optimize, we can see some unused resources and some things we can actually clean up. So we can do that all directly from within Beam, so that will save us even more money.
Awesome.
Yep. And if I actually jump back to that app, the Archaeus app, we can look at that and we can see it's a very flat-lined app. There's not a lot of workload dynamics there. It's pretty static. So that makes it very good for on-prem. And we've integrated also the migrate button directly into Beam, so you can actually kick off that migration workflow directly from there as well.
Got it. And that's just a teaser into how we're bringing hybrid cloud ops into one integrated offering between Calm, Beam, Epoch, and a bunch of other things associated with Nutanix Move. So while this is going on, maybe we want to spend some time on what's actually underpinning the Move technology.
Yep, yeah, so it's essentially a 4-step process. So the first thing we do is we actually do a discovery, right? So we discover everything that's running in AWS or on the public cloud, and we take an inventory of what that application is comprised of. So we have different EC2 instances with a certain CPU and memory footprint, and then we map that to the corresponding what it would look like in AHV. So if you have like an M4 extra large or a T2 medium, that's going to map to a specific CPU and memory footprint on the AHV side, as well as we take into account, of course, the networking and the storage. Then the second thing we do is we actually provision into AHV using those numbers, so the kind of count of VMs and then the sizes of those VMs. And then the third part is actually the hard part. That's the part where we actually have to migrate all that data over. And so the way we do that is we do essentially a smart sync, or we've integrated a change block tracking driver into the software that will actually manage the changes. So once that first initial sync is done, if there's any changes that are done before the cutover, they also need to be migrated. But we're not migrating the entire VM. So if we have like a 1 terabyte or 500 gig VM, it's not going to be feasible to actually copy all that data over every time.
And I think that's an important point. I know that on-prem VMs and technologies, obviously we have change block tracking CBT, but there is no CBT in AWS, for example, right? And that's one of the core innovations of Nutanix Move, was to create that layers that allows us that freedom to kind of move back and forth. Yeah.
Yep. So now we can see that our cutover is actually completed here. It's running here on the Nutanix cloud with an internal IP address. And so if we actually jump into it, should have our picks from that we picked earlier. So.
All right, that's the app that's migrated back. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much.